Top trade negotiators in the Canadian government spent several days in Washington meeting with the August 1st deadline to stave off a 35% tariff on Canadian goods.
We are looking for the best deal for Canada.
President Donald Trump just said the U.S. has not necessarily been focused on this country and trade.
Top trade negotiators in the Canadian government spent several crucial days in Washington, meeting with key players from the Trump administration and Congress. The countdown was on as the August 1st deadline loomed, threatening a 35% tariff on Canadian goods if an agreement wasn't reached. Despite the growing pressure, Canada's strategy remained focused on securing the best possible deal. The Canadian government wasn't about to settle for anything less than favorable terms for its long-term economic interests. President Donald Trump, speaking candidly, noted that the United States had not been prioritizing Canada in its trade discussions. He even went so far as to suggest that the U.S. might not reach a trade deal with Canada, indicating that tariffs might be the only route forward. "We haven't really had a lot of luck with Canada. I think Canada could be one where they'll just pay tariffs. It's not really a negotiation," Trump remarked, seemingly resigned to the possibility of further economic tension. Canada, however, was resolute. Canada's Ministry of Finance responded with a blunt and firm statement. "We will only sign if it is the best deal for Canada." This declaration sent shockwaves through the White House, effectively nullifying the previously touted August 1st deadline. The Trump administration had been using the looming tariffs as leverage, but Canada's firm stance made it clear that Ottawa would not be pressured into an unfavorable deal. At this point, more than 35% of Canada's key exports were being hit with hefty U.S. tariffs, impacting industries such as steel, aluminum, lumber, automobiles, and energy. The situation seemed dire. Ottawa faced intense pressure to back down and accept a rushed agreement. Yet by the end of July, Canada was holding its ground, maintaining silence in the face of escalating tensions. Negotiations continued quietly behind closed doors, but there were no signs of concessions from the Canadian side. In fact, Canadian officials were clear. They would not sacrifice long-term strategic interests just to secure a last-minute deal. They were not willing to trade away future stability for short-term gains. The Trump administration, on the other hand, was aggressively using tariffs as a tool of pressure. As each day passed, the question loomed: what made Ottawa so unshaken? Why was Canada so confident in the face of these escalating tariff threats? The answer lies in how Prime Minister Mark Carney has reshaped Canada's trade strategy, particularly in the wake of Trump's aggressive moves. When Carney took office, he wasted no time in making it clear that Canada was not in a rush to sign a deal. He emphasized that Canada's goal was to secure the best possible agreement, not just to meet arbitrary deadlines. He openly stated that Canada would not be bullied into a deal simply for the sake of expediency. As the U.S. imposed significant tariffs on key Canadian goods, 25% on steel, 25% on aluminum, and even threatened to rise to 35% on non-compliant goods, Carney's response was measured. He did not engage in the kind of theatrical gestures that the Trump administration expected. Instead, Canada quietly began to reposition itself. The Canadian provinces of Ontario and Alberta, which are economic powerhouses in Canada's industrial and energy sectors, made it clear that they were prepared for a full-scale tariff war. They had already developed contingency plans to minimize the impact of these tariffs. Canadian businesses, particularly in the automotive, energy, and steel sectors, were also ready thanks to pre-established measures designed to weather the storm. The Canadian government activated an $8 billion worker protection fund to support those sectors hardest hit by the tariffs. This response wasn't spontaneous. It was part of a long-term national economic defense strategy that had been put in place long before the crisis unfolded. Carney, rather than reacting hastily to Trump's schedule, took advantage of the time available. He knew that if the U.S. had to wait for Canada to act, the situation would put Washington in a reactive position, building pressure on the U.S. from within. With rising inflation, consumer dissatisfaction with tariffs, and growing uncertainty over trade relations, Carney's calculated patience began to pay off. By the end of July, negotiations were still at an impasse, but Canada had successfully used time as its ally. Carney reiterated his willingness to take as much time as necessary to secure a deal that was truly in Canada's best interest. The Trump administration, by contrast, showed signs of frustration. Trump himself openly admitted that he did not expect to reach a deal with Canada before the August 1st deadline, stating that he could impose the 35% tariff unilaterally. Washington's expectations were clear. They thought Canada would panic and sign a deal to avoid the economic fallout. But Carney understood that rushing into a deal would only compromise Canada's long-term interests. So instead of playing into Washington's hand, Canada flipped the board. Carney turned the pressure into an opportunity by using the time to build new trade relationships with Europe and Asia. This was the game changer. By diversifying its trade partners, Canada began to reduce its dependency on the U.S. market, opening entirely new trade frontiers. This pivot in strategy caught the Trump administration off guard and shifted the negotiation dynamics entirely. The U.S. could no longer dictate the terms of the deal. Canada had regained control of the negotiation tempo. This move, far from being a defensive reaction, became a proactive diplomatic strategy. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Stay tuned for more updates and content. We've got plenty more coming your way. Meanwhile, Canada's uranium exports saw a dramatic rise, positioning the country as the second largest uranium producer in the world. With growing demand for uranium, particularly from U.S. tech giants like Amazon and Google, Canada was gaining leverage in negotiations with Washington. In 2024, Canada's uranium production reached 37 million pounds, and over 80% of it was being exported to Europe and Asia. As Canada expanded its global trade network, its reliance on the U.S. market decreased. Between May 2024 and May 2025, exports to the U.S. dropped by 10%, while exports to the EU, UK, Australia, and other markets surged by over 40%. This shift was part of Carney's broader strategy to diversify Canada's trade relations and build a more resilient economy. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Stay tuned for more updates and content. We've got plenty more coming your way.